Hi there, folks. It's Roger from There Be Giants, your friendly giant here on Giant Talk. Really pleased to be back with you and super chuffed to be joined by Patrick Jocelyn from Omniplex, who's the CEO there. So, Patrick, welcome to Giant Talk.
Hello, Roger. Nice
hi.
You.
Good to see you too. Now, you're here to talk to us about your experience with OKRs. You know, we've done quite a few episodes recently where we've been talking about, you know, things around OKRs and with other practitioners and, you know, sort of moving thinking forward. But I think it's always good to get back to, you know, grassroots, so to speak, in terms of speaking to you know, leaders of organisations that have been using them for a while. So, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and also about Omniplex and what you do?
Sure. So, I'm the CEO of Omniplex Learning, and Omniplex Learning is a business that supports the L&D requirements of many corporations, particularly multinationals and internationals that sit in the UK, where they want to create digital learning to either help onboard or for regulatory compliance or for maybe just learning extra skills. And we either help them make it, we make it for themselves, or we host for them to consume this content for them to improve their working lives and sometimes their personal lives. So that's really where we are experts in digital learning and all aspects of it.
So it's much more than an LMS system, isn't it?
It is, yeah. LMS is just one component that often is the center of delivery and consumption, but actually there's so much more to it. And having a digital learning need is usually the first step in where an L&D team might have had instruction from other departments saying, I have a digital learning need. That could be as simple as I want to onboard successfully all these new people joining in a retail environment, or it could be, hey, I need everybody to be taking this financial services regulation learning and completing it, and we need to evidence that. Or sometimes it can be, we want to do something different. We want people to be more engaged. We want people to understand maybe our internal values. And it's so many different things that people ask. But often it starts with I have a digital learning need, maybe a challenge that I want to do something different. And recently, some of those big challenges are, how can we get more out of our investment in, for instance, software products where it's a process. You know, people know how to use the product, but they don't understand the process they need to go in the product. So doing training traditionally where it's in a classroom with someone at the front pointing a stick at a PowerPoint doesn't really help your modern learners understand the application. So what we've started doing is seeing this in the flow of learning, where the learning is actually whilst you're in the application of something like a CRM system or a file system or whatever it might be, where you're learning not just the product, but also the processes that those companies need to have you go through and learn. And if you do that whilst you're in the application, of course, your learning is faster, more relevant, and actually you're saving a lot of time.
Do you know, I wished I'd known you 15 years ago. Because I used to work in L&D. I was an L&D business partner for a while, so kind of working with my part of the organisation and making sure that the learning and sort of cultural development solutions which we put in place supported the business strategy, and it was. You know, e-learning was around, but it was very clunky, and you know, hadn't matured to the level that it is now. And you know, your kind of solution would have been like rocket fuel for us, I'm sure.
Well, so like to think that.
Yeah, I'm sure. So tell us a bit about the sort of growth stage of the business, and maybe a little bit about the history, you know, how the business has come to be where it is now.
Sure. So the business actually is about 30 years old in in the structure of the business. But in truth, the business started accelerating in growth from about 2015, 2016, where that move from classroom-based training to e-learning or digital learning, depending on what you're calling it, started to accelerate, where there were cost savings, there were time savings. And then, of course, when COVID happened and people couldn't physically go into these classrooms, we had a really strong L&D team demand of saying, hey, we've got to now forcibly move what we had been doing in a classroom online.
Yeah.
And suddenly from 2020, which also happened to be where the investment from our private equity backed owners, LDC, came in. And so a lot of our growth, and we've been growth percentages of 45% CAGR. So over the last 3 years, we've been growing at around 45% per annum, which is, pretty fast. But to support that growth, we've needed to obviously invest in people, in platforms, in structure that allows us to keep that growth rate up. And more importantly, we've needed to professionalize and expand things like product portfolios, people that can take us to that next required level of getting higher up the power chain. So where we might have been in a L&D department somewhere, now we're often in, the CXO level of an organization. And to do that, you can't just let the growth take you there. You actually need to be quite structured in what you want to achieve and not just let it happen by accident.
That's really, I'm just really curious about that phrase that you just used there. You can't just let the growth take you there.
Yeah.
Just unpack that a little bit more for me, if you would, please.
So I think fast growth companies are by design in the main. Now, you can get a year-to-year fast growth by being a bit lucky, but it's rare to be able to sustain fast growth through just being lucky. And for me, what that means is that just because you sold more in a post year over a previous year, that might just be a market condition on a rising tide.
Yeah.
But you won't always have a rising tide. So for us, it was about being very prescriptive on who and how we were going to grow.
Right.
And things like improving churn rates. Everybody always wants to improve churn rates, i.e. the amount of people that buy a product and then renew it year after year. But if you're not prescriptive about it, then it is just a hope rather than something that you've planned for. And when you plan for it, you can improve churn by giving customers much better support, by giving people tips and tricks, by having, simple as marketing automation plans that send out a regular piece of communication to remind someone they've got this bit of software. And then it's about giving them the additional support. So when someone has bought a piece of software, often they're very excited. They use it for the first few months, try and build what they want. But often they realize they don't have the ability and they need extra help, extra support, extra learning, maybe some templates, maybe something that they can use as that's what I'd like to achieve. So it's all about giving people this is what good looks like, and making sure that you've got them to tell you what does good look like from this starting point. And that needs structure, it needs processes, it needs people that can take you along, and that credibility is built with those customers who often, let's be honest, on the 80-20 rule, so 20% of your customers often are 80% of your revenues.
Yeah.
Therefore, it is important to build relationships. It's important to manage those accounts. It's important to try and get further up power lines where you're more strategic in any particular customer.
Yeah.
And therefore, when those framework agreements for we need to buy more, you're in it rather than not in it, and that helps your growth.
Sure.
Again, it's not accidents that you're on a framework.
So effectively what you're talking about there is strategy, being clear about strategy.
Very much so. And it's about execution of strategy. So again, strategy is great, but useless if you're not going to execute against it. So for me, it's about having strategy with milestones, and it's about having milestones that are reachable and achievable, and that you've got a group of individuals who understand timelines and what these milestones look like, as well as supporting of the overall strategy, which might take you, a year ahead rather than just the next 3 months.
So I guess that's what led you to use OKRs then.
Absolutely. So when we looked at the marketplace of how do we do these transformational type steps, how do we really push the company to do things that it wouldn't naturally do in this high growth environment? Mm-hmm. And that's where OKRs came in. And what we knew about OKRs from working with them previously is that they're really good at driving the strategic direction, but badly done OKRs are really poor execution. And so we were looking for a consulting firm that could assist us on the journey. And the reason we went to There Be Giants was because internally you evidenced to us that you were using it yourselves. You were using it to drive your own business. There were many other consulting firms that said they were expert, but weren't using it internally. And for us, that was just a big red flag. We wanted people to understand that moving to OKRs isn't just about documentation. It's actually about cadence. It's actually about structure and making sure that people understand that, putting in extra diary events for a lot of people, you have to have reason behind it, and you have to understand what it's going to look like after.
There has to be payback from the time invested.
It really is. And so we were fairly impressed with There Be Giants' first proposal, but also the way that they set us up from a tops down, but also a non-siloed structure of bringing in the right people at the right time to create these OKR squads. And both in the design, the development, and then the operation, your team have held our hand all the way. We're now in our third quarter of the OKRs.
Yeah.
And I would say that it is absolutely embedded in the company. And that isn't necessarily always the case. We're a company of about 100 people. So we're not large by any stretch of the imagination, but we do have departments. They do still have some silo mentality.
Yeah.
So seeing the OKR squads break that, and seeing that we are already on our milestones towards our annual strategy, seeing significant on-target direction towards meeting those big, gnarly goals that we set in the first place. It's lovely to see, actually.
Good. Yeah, it's interesting. You say you're only about 100 people, but then still that's big enough to see silos emerge.
Yeah.
I wonder what the tipping point is. A certain number of if there's like a certain number of people where silos become more of a risk than they were before you reach that threshold.
My view is that once you have about 3 layers of management, you are going to get silos, and it's a human nature. And it's no bad thing, a silo, when you get focus, and laser focus is a great way to get things achieved. Where it doesn't work is where to get the big end in mind is where you need these departments to work really well together and understand each other's priorities. And again, that's where OKRs have been fantastic, because it takes the KPIs that each of these potentially siloed departments can have and bring them much more where they're interlinked towards the objectives that you've set. In the OKRs and the key results that you want to deliver. And I think I don't mind having laser focused, departments that really feel a big part of the business and that they're really important. But what I love to see is when these best of the best get together working towards a common goal. And, although you're not breaking the silos down, what you are is appreciating the priorities that others have, and therefore the workloads, and sometimes it just changes what you might do rather than if you were just on your own.
I've seen that in a lot of organisations where we've put that cross-functional approach in at the second level, and it's really helped with that collaboration. So you've mentioned a couple of benefits there. You've mentioned the collaboration. You've mentioned the fact that you can see clearly, you moving towards those big ambitious goals and targets that you have. You also mentioned that you have investors, and I'm curious actually to hear how your investors have responded to the use of OKRs. Have they even been aware of it? Have they seen anything, any evidence of them?
So the way we started this process is we built our strategy with our investors as part of just playing that back, and they all, right from day one, knew that we were moving to an OKR system.
Yeah.
So we report every month in our board meetings where we are on the OKRs. I mean, they are very aware. They have full visibility on a monthly report of what the strategic OKRs are, and then how the transformational quarterly goals and what's in those are working towards the ultimate objective, which was the strategy that was built all those months ago.
Right.
So their support is substantial. You also know that businesses that use the OKR system, it's becoming quite important now. Lots of big corporations are talking about OKRs and are talking about their cadences. And for a smaller business like us, with an investor being able to take that to where the next investment might be, actually it gives good credibility that you're a structured organization, that you understand how to make these big changes.
Right.
And because the OKR is a framework that people do understand and know where it's come from, it's a big tick in a box. It's like having your employer net promoter scores. It's not the be and an end all, but it absolutely gives a tick of you are a professional organization, that you care about your staff. And the OKRs is you're a professional organization, you care about results.
Yeah.
And for me, these two often get put hand in hand when you're presenting out of, how are we doing at any point in time.
So in a nutshell, it's investor credibility, isn't it?
Definitely is.
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. So, you mentioned about KPIs earlier on, and this is something that we debate at length on Giant Talk about the interplay, the relationship between OKRs and KPIs. But from your point of view, kind of thinking of organizational performance as a whole, you've got your strategy, you've got your operation. So how do you see the interplay between OKRs and KPIs working in Omniplex for you?
Yeah. So I think your team helped us understand the relationship between OKRs and KPIs, and your team really supported that KPIs are, in the using car as an analogy, your sort of speedo, your rev counter, your fuel gauge. They tell you if the engine's overheating or not, and so on and so forth, but it doesn't tell you where you're going. Whereas your satellite navigation is telling you where you're trying to get to. And you need the two together, because you can't get where you're going on the satellite navigation if you don't have enough fuel or your engine's overheated. So it's very important that you have those KPIs constantly evaluating whether you're going forward and you've got the capability and the fuel in the tank, whatever your analogies are. But if you don't have a direction of travel, you could just travel in circles, and you could still have a great fuel gauge, and you could still have your temperature in, reading the right temperature, but you're going in a circle, and it would still be showing that. Yeah. Whereas what the sat nav is doing is taking you on that longer end in mind journey, where the performance of the company and those key KPIs that you're going to be looking at are probably just saying, yes, you have a good chance of getting to your end destination, and then you get, the next set that you might want to do. So for me, they are absolutely linked, and they're essential that you're comparing and looking at them. And the way that we operate the business is we look at the OKRs, and we look at obviously the key results, and we do all of the cadence there. But at the same time, we're also looking at what the company performance is. And if we need to adjust them because we're coming off from anywhere, then we're okay to take a detour.
Right. Okay. That's a good way of putting it, I suppose, a detour, because that implies that you're just taking a small change of direction with the intention of going back on track. Yeah.
Exactly that.
Yeah. Okay. And from a people or a cultural perspective, is there anything that by bringing in OKRs you've had to work on, to change, to tweak at all?
So we started off with trying to get to the bare few OKRs, and we actually started on 3. So we had 3 strategic OKRs that we were going to build our business case around, and therefore all of the transformational OKRs that we run quarterly.
Sure. What
we realized was that we probably did need a 4th, although we tried to keep it to the power of 3. We missed out one of the ones that really was around company performance. And although the other 3 would drive ultimately company performance, by not having a specific OKR that focused on company performance, what it meant is that culturally it could look like we weren't still 100% focused on the performance of the company.
Yeah.
And, I'll give you an example of that. So one of our OKRs is very much around employee engagement and improving our employee net promoter score. And some of those are key results about how many people have said that they have goals set for them, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, if you just look at that, it's not, although you could relatably say that a happy person, a happy employee with clear goals is going to be successful for your business, it doesn't necessarily have a measure of, right, we are going to grow by X amount because we've done this, and therefore people are very end result based who want to see numbers, particularly finance teams, for example, and sales teams. They struggle with just the EQ piece. They want a bit of the IQ, and the IQ for me in this sense is the business, is how the business is performing, how we want it to perform. Whereas the EQ is sometimes how emotional we want people to behave, and how we want them to be supportive of others, for example. And that is the employee side.
Well, you're working on the assumption there, aren't you, that the more people in the organization have goals set, the more focused they're going to be, so on and so forth, the more engaged they're going to be. But that would be a leading measure, because it shows that you're on the right track, but it's no actual measure of, ultimate outcome, ultimate success. And so I can completely understand where your finance colleagues are coming from, because the business performance is the lagging measure, isn't it?
That's right. And I think we always try and have the lagging measure as our number one, and a leading measure where we know that it might be influencing the lagging measures as number 2. We are very aware of how that might be taken by the team, but B, really is proving that we're on track to continue the high growth rates that we've enjoyed. So you have to have the balance. And I think the lesson learned is being very aware of that at the start of the process. If there was one thing that I would have done different, it would probably be that very one of making sure that you've got the emotional pieces, but also, let's call it the intelligence pieces, and for me, those differences are how someone feels, the goals they've been set. It's slightly intangible, because unless you saw each of those goals, you wouldn't absolutely know that those goals are the right ones to take in the right direction. But you know that in essence, they must be having some management time. They must be having some direction of travel, versus the IQ piece, which really is what numbers, how many somethings will we sell? What revenues will we generate? What's our EBITDA, and our ultimate profit?
Yeah.
And those things joined together give you the best of both worlds.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you just kind of touched upon what my next question was going to be, which is a bit of a reflective one. If you were to approach these again from scratch, what is it that you might do differently? So just unpack what you mentioned there for us.
We went fast on this. We didn't hang around. We started this process in July last year, and we went very quickly into the consulting workshops, into developing the OKRs from the strategy we'd built back in July. And then we scrambled around, and we really pushed hard and had the fewest people involved we could, although we did share to the company our end ambition.
Sure.
If I was doing it again, I would have had a little bit more time before we kicked it off. I would have had an extra couple of months to just really war game what might happen, what the end in mind might feel differently for one person who was perhaps in a squad versus someone that could see it presented at the company town halls but wasn't involved, whether they would feel differently about it.
Yeah.
And because you can't involve necessarily everybody all the time in OKRs, it's very easy for people to have less of an understanding of why. And so embedding OKRs in the company as a culture, I think, is more than just running through all the workshops. That communication piece probably is the one thing I would have liked to have done a bit better. And following on from that communication piece is getting the cadence right, making sure that it's built into people's diaries.
Sure.
And publishing.
Yeah.
Be very, very visible about what the expectations were and when these events would be happening through the company.
Yeah.
And who was involved. So we could definitely have done better, but we've learnt that for this next transformational OKRs that we're going to be running next month.
Right. Okay. So there's a bit about sort of preparing the groundwork for the change that's coming. Right. Okay. That's really interesting, because we do hear that a number of times from different clients. And when we did, we've done a couple of, over the past 4 years, we've done a couple of pieces of research into organizations using OKRs, why they use them, how they've used them, so on and so forth. And I do remember one of the key findings being that smaller organizations of 100 or less tend to approach them much more rapidly, and tend to have the capacity to absorb that change a bit more than larger organizations. I don't think that would be anything earth-shattering as a finding for people, but I do think it's interesting that the data actually tells us that as well. So, but interesting to hear your experience. So, with the desire to kind of lay the groundwork for change a bit more, did you find yourself facing some confusion, some resistance? What was occurring for you?
I don't think there was any confusion.
Right.
So I think people understood we were very clear in building our strategy first and presenting that out, and then moving to OKRs. I mean, I would say to anybody listening to this podcast is, if you don't know what your strategy is, don't move into OKRs. You need to be clear yourself of where you want to get to, i.e. on that sat nav, just think about what your end destination is before you bring OKRs in, because otherwise you're going to fail. Yeah. So that would be number one. And our staff and teams understood our direction of travel. Where we brought OKRs in, I think people had expected to be part of it, of their daily lives. And in big corporations, what they tend to do is set goals individual level using OKR and the OKR framework, and they embed it in everything that they do. We couldn't do that from day one. So people need to know might be people that aren't part of a squad, but we want them to be part of the squad the following occasion.
Yeah.
And so having them bought into it, having them aware of what it is, and the only way probably to do that is by showing them the success that other squads have had, is, I'm going to say, best practice moving forward.
Yeah.
And evidencing, hey, here was the start, here's the end, this retrospective of what was changed and the key result from it, shared with then people who when they are asked to be part of a squad, are excited by previous squad success and rate of change. And for me, that then gets it bought in and becomes part of company culture.
Right. Okay. No, I think that's really interesting. It's because you're right. If you're going to use them as a spotlight rather than a floodlight, not everyone can be involved at the same time. But with an organisation, particularly of just 100 people, that spotlight is going to move from cycle to cycle. And I dare say that maybe over the course of a 12-month period, perhaps everybody might be involved in some way, shape, or form, but just not at the same time. Everybody has their turn, so to speak.
I think you need to also be considering where at any period in time, we're growing, we're buying companies, we might go and take on another business that has another 100 people for all we know. So you can never assume everybody knows, because people are joining every single week. And therefore, the other assumption is that you assume that these new joiners know what an OKR is, let alone who's involved and what you need as an outcome. So you have to be prepared to talk about OKRs as if everybody is new. Otherwise, you'll leave people behind, and people will get confused. And over a course of a year, it's quite easy to have another 20% of people on board that might not have seen the original starting point.
So I've got to ask, given what you guys do as a business and what you do for clients, do you have OKRs built into your learning, onboarding?
So we do. It's absolutely part of our onboarding. We take them through our OKR, at least the concept of it. So we make sure that they understand the dashboard we've just talked about, the sat nav and the dashboard. We also make sure that they understand the spotlight and the floodlight that you've talked about. So we take them through that sort of 4 or 5 why we do it. But it's very easy when you're joining to then forget that, because if you're not then involved, probably in the next couple of months, you couldn't be expected to remember and then suddenly be involved in the next 3 months. So you have to keep telling people, you have to keep showing people what's happening, you have to keep reminding them of the progress that you've made from the original set of OKRs that you've installed. And I think that communication, you just can't ever over communicate.
No. That's a principle that I've followed in many different aspects of management and leadership over the years. But it's one that's often overlooked, sadly.
It's so easy to overlook because we assume you've told someone once, or I've sent an email, job done. Yeah. And actually, people learn in different ways. We know this from being L&D experts. And I think that whatever your forum is, and you probably have 3 or 4, you have to just have this to be part of your culture in every single one of those communication mediums. Just give people that update, even if it's just to say, hey, it's as simple as 1, 2, 3. That's your update for the OKRs. That's good enough. If you're in this cadence. But what you don't want to do is just do a year ago we started this and this is the result, because there's been a year of where people might have forgotten that we even started a year ago, or they've joined post when it was started. Yeah.
Right. Well, Patrick, hugely grateful for you sharing your experiences. I know it's been quite a challenge, I think, as you've worked through with them. But you remain committed to them. And I think, you know, as you said, you're going into your third cycle now. And in my experience, it's usually from this point where things start to get a little bit slicker. So, you know, because you can only practice the transitions when they happen. So you're coming up to your next one. And yeah, I am excited to see how you get on over the course of the coming months, because I think you're gonna find them really click into place for you. So let's just wrap up by just letting our listeners know if they want to reach out to you. Perhaps maybe they're interested in the learning solution. How can they find you?
I think they can go to our website, omniplexlearning.com. They could send me an email, patrick.jocelyn@omniplexlearning.com, or they can go onto our LinkedIn and follow us, and there's lots of information shared on a regular basis from that marketing team and sales team that are going to keep you informed on some of the successes we're having, some of the outcomes that are created from the work that we do with many of our existing customers.
Brilliant. I'll make sure that's all in the show notes so that everybody can see that if they want to. So thank you very much again, Patrick. Really appreciate your time. And I hope our listeners have managed to glean something from this. It's always good hearing it firsthand from somebody who's walked the walk, so to speak. And thanks for tuning in again. And I shall be back with you very soon with another interesting conversation around all things OKRs on Giant Talk. Thanks very much now. Take care.